Story 1. One of my best friends was from the wrong side of the tracks, poor, had a mullet, and wore Metallica shirts long before they broke into the mainstream. He was extremely popular because he was crazy smart, very talented, and driven. Everyone wanted to be his friend, and he was very open about being nice to everyone. Many parents were like, "Don't hang out with that John Smith boy, he's on drugs and he's a bad influence." He absolutely was not. It was the satanic scare of the late 80s and 90s, and he liked metal music. So what? He worked his ass off all his life and is now pretty damn wealthy with a house, wife, and kids in California. When we chat on the phone, he is still the exact same person I grew up with. Crazy, funny, and extremely kind. Story 2. Most popular kid in our school was a guy named Josh. Insanely outgoing and friendly. He could befriend anyone he talked to within 5 seconds, and he always did. Active athlete, was on the football team, straight A student, very devout churchgoer. I didn't even meet him until later in high school, where he was part of a Dungeons & Dragons game I joined. Always put on a great time role-playing. While we never got close, we had a couple of extraordinarily memorable times together during our senior year of high school. Very fun and meaningful times that stood out strongly to me then during a very sad part of my life, and are still remembered fondly by me 20 years later. Josh was going places, and he'd make a difference somewhere. We lost touch after high school. 3 years later, he fell asleep behind the wheel of his truck and hit a tree. He died on impact. Unfortunately found out through another friend who'd kept up with him, and we went to his funeral. I'd never seen a church so packed full of people for something like this. Hundreds and hundreds of people, from our school, from his church, from all over life. The church was legitimately full. To this day, one of my true lifelong regrets is letting my anxiety get the better of me when Josh's pastor asked people to come up to the mic and say something about Josh. I should have told everyone of our ludicrous all-nighter, digging his truck out of the mud in a forest he'd gone mudding in, after an evening school performance where we were all still in khakis and polos. Finishing at 3 a.m. and somehow ending our bedraggled asses at IHOP after finally getting it out. I should have told everyone how we found out our D&D Dungeon Master was moving away on short notice, and we hightailed it to his place after school and literally ran out of gas in that truck getting there. Then flooded the engine refilling it from a jerry can, stuck with our DM who didn't want anyone coming to say goodbye, and ending up late in the evening laying in that truck bed talking about science and philosophy and religion. 3 teenage dudes waiting for that damn truck to get to a drivable condition so we could say goodbye to our friend properly before he disappeared from our lives. I'm nearly 40. And I still regret not saying how great of a guy he was to a short, scrawny, long-haired metalhead weirdo like I was in high school. Because he was. He was going to make a difference. I suppose, given all the people at his funeral, he still did. Story 3. My high school graduating class was 952 people. I don't even know who the most popular people were. My class was about that size, and I remember always thinking that many of the high school stereotypes you would see on TV and film didn't seem to apply at a school that huge. People who might have been the school bully in a smaller school are properly segregated, and people who might have been an outcast in a smaller school could always find a clique of similarly minded weirdos. Popularity was never a school-wide thing because the orchestra people, the jocks and goths, the potheads, etc., all had their own separate leaders. Also, as a result, we would often have a lot of cross-clique friendships and mixed parties, where people tended to be generally cool with each other. Story 4. Small town. There are always exceptions, but most kids who were popular were friendly, outgoing, well-dressed, and emotionally stable. That happened because they came from families with more money and better educated parents. Those parents often provided better mentoring, ensured they went to college, and as a result, the kids ended up professionals who did reasonably well for themselves. This is a very unpopular and underreported reality, as the unpopular kids desperately want to believe the popular guys end up working at the local gas station or Walmart once their days as sports stars or heartthrobs are gone. While the nerds go on to become rich and successful, exactly because of reasons that made them unpopular in school. Unfortunately for them, popularity is often based on social status and people skills, two key assets in life at any age. Story 5. I'm old. I graduated from high school in 1970. My classmate rundown. One of the most popular ones came up with the name Windows while a VP at Microsoft. One became a state governor and a U.S. senator. Left politics in disgrace over racist comments. One is a hotshot on Wall Street. One of the less popular ones headed up a major record label for a while. One was once mayor of a coastal town. Another less popular one was the victim of a serial killer. Another thoroughly unpopular one faked his own death to get out of some financial fraud. Most popular and unpopular faded into obscurity, as most of us do. Heard about a death just this week. Time marches on. Story 6. The most popular kid in my class ended up being the last guy at the party, still chasing the good times. Everyone either grew up and started families or completely lost themselves to drugs. He fell further and further into addiction. It became more and more common for him to only hang with the guys who were still partying. Rock bottom for him was when his family realized he wasn't fixing up the property they had purchased for an investment. He was just taking the money and shooting it into his arm. Myself, his father, who was battling terminal cancer, his stepmother, and his mother all met at the property for his intervention. They could not believe the state of the house, even though I had informed them multiple times. The place was filled with unused drywall in stacks around the framed walls. Dead mice and dogs covered the floors. Nothing except his TV and the refrigerator worked. The bathroom had been remodeled, but the rest of the building was down to the studs and looked like a crack house. For context, when we were kids, he lived around the corner from my family. He used to come over every morning for a ride to school, and my mom would cook all of us breakfast. My mom owned a fish market around the corner, and the only real time she would get with us was the late mornings. She worked from 3 a.m. to 6 p.m. most days, so 7:30 was late. She would cook a full-on breakfast for each of the kids, me, my two siblings, and whatever friends were there that morning. And I mean full-on breakfast. Pancakes, waffles, eggs, French toast, literally anything you could want, she would make it. To this day, they are some of my favorite memories. After the intervention and rehab, it became clear that he needed to stay in a longer-term clean living facility, and it was probably best if he moved permanently to avoid falling back into old habits at home. I only saw my friend 3 more times after that intervention, all funerals. 2 of the funerals were for our best friends. They both OD'd. One had actually gotten clean and had a slip and overdosed when he decided to get high one night with the same dose he used when he was a full-on addict. The other had a bad batch with fentanyl. The last time I saw my friend was at his father's funeral. He had stopped at my mother's house that morning. She made him French toast. They ate, laughed, and cried. He told my mother that those days having breakfast with us in the morning were the only times he really felt loved and cared for. Later that day, I hugged him at the funeral. It felt like he wasn't ever going to let go. I still think about that moment. That night, he flew home and committed suicide. Every day I regret not helping him sooner. I regret keeping him at arm's distance while he was getting sober. Most of all, I'm mad at myself that if given the chance, I'd probably make the same choices and choose my wife and kids and build a life over messing around with my knucklehead friends. Story 7. One of, if not the most popular girls in my grade, had money. Her parents owned the only liquor store in the county, dry counties for 45 miles. Well, that gravy train ended when the county went wet and prices got competitive. The problem was, they apparently never saved money the entire time. Then their regulars saw that the price was much lower at the gas station compared to what they had been paying them, like 30% over SRP. They closed very quickly. All of their luxury vehicles got sold, but they had the house paid. They moved after a while. I saw her 3 years post-graduation, and she had doubled her weight and was having pics printed of her fiancé, who I found out was a trust fund guy after the fact. The souped-up muscle car in his pics was a hint. He broke it off with her like a month later. From what I've heard, he figured out she was just there for money. Most of that info I got secondhand, and I was only ever present for the pictures part. I don't use Facebook, so I never verified anything. I also don't care to investigate. I've stopped letting high school BS live in my head rent-free. Story 8. He was a theater kid, a musician, and generally just the life of the party. He was gang raped in college and became a shut-in. He and his mother moved to California and effectively dropped off the face of the earth. We used to be close, like sleepovers and stuff. Hung out all the time. Haven't heard from him in probably 15 years, and I have no way to contact him anymore. I hope you're okay out there, Johnny. Story 9. The most popular happened to be the highest performing. Most of them didn't thrive after completing college. I think the rigid process of accomplishing assigned tasks as they're presented screws people up when they're met with the real world, and all of a sudden, it's finally up to them to learn how to improvise. I wasn't a very popular kid, but a similar thing happened to me. School was easy for me because the information needed to complete any given assignment could be mostly found within a few resources that were covered during that section. In the real world, problems were so much more open-ended. I wasn't really prepared for that. Luckily, though, I pretty quickly realized that an overwhelming amount of folks are in a fake-it-till-you-make-it mindset. Took me a bit longer than I'm sure my classmates would have predicted for me, but I'd say I'm at a pretty stable spot now career-wise. Story 10. He graduated in 1961 as an all-star athlete with letters in 2 sports over 4 years. Class and school president, homecoming king, the whole package in a very small town. He was handsome, too. Went to college on a sports scholarship and flunked out the first semester. Came home, knocked up his high school girlfriend, married, had 2 kids, and got divorced. Worked for my dad as a farmer and remarried maybe 10 years later. Dad decided to bankroll this star with an underwritten line of credit so the wonderkind could start grass seed farming on his own. This credit line swelled up to over $850,000 in the late 70s, so nearly $4 million in today's money. Come to find out, he was buying expensive equipment and also chartering jets to Las Vegas for golf and gambling trips for his friends. He'd often be seen in bars lighting cigars with $100 bills because, why not? Dad then cut him off and seized all his property, sold it, and managed to pay the bank most of the money from that. Fast forward to today. He's 80, living on his remarried wife's pension as a teacher and taking care of her as she developed early Alzheimer's. His mom gave him a house and place to live 40 years ago, so he has that. I looked him up on Facebook recently. He has as his profile photo a fuzzy snapshot of his high school Most Valuable Player trophy. Story 11. I was once on a train from New York City back to my hometown for Thanksgiving. By chance, I ended up sitting next to a guy from my high school. I didn't know him that well, as we were part of a semi-large graduating class, but we were familiar enough to chat with each other, to pass the time. He was good friends with 2 of the most popular dudes from our high school, and he said they were both kind of flailing in early adulthood. One of them got broken up with by his equally popular girlfriend right before college had started, and he just could not handle it. He would show up to her school, unannounced, and just see what she was up to and bark at any dude who talked to her. She had to threaten a restraining order to get him to back off. Apparently, he chilled out a little bit in the ensuing years, but just really struggled to make things happen for himself outside of the high school environment. The other did mostly fine during our college years, but really started to struggle once we all graduated, and he lost the comforting structures of school. He was a handsome dude in our town as a teenager, but now, living in NYC, he was in an ocean of handsome dudes, and apparently struggled a little bit not getting preferential treatment as often, and not having girls interested in him after spitting a minimal amount of game. I don't bring this up to wish ill on either of them. I think they're both interesting examples of how poorly prepared most people are to jump off the cliff of leaving high school. You've spent your entire life building a life and network within a very specific life structure, and then suddenly, overnight, it all goes away. I think some kids, especially ones who got popular early, like going all the way back to 4th or 5th grade, do really struggle with the fact that one day they're thrust amid a sea of new people who don't perceive them as popular. Story 12. Some of them went off to college to live normal lives. One was gravely injured in a house fire. One dropped out of college and moved back home with his parents. He was initially supposed to go to my school on a baseball scholarship, but the school cut the baseball program at the last minute, and he was forced to go somewhere else. I feel bad, because that probably played a role in how things turned out. I hope he finds a path soon. Story 13. Here's a hard pill to swallow for people reviewing the comments. The overwhelming majority of the popular kids do better than the overwhelming majority of the nerdy kids. Of course, there's some loser football captains and mega wealthy nerds, but if you had to place a bet, cool kids do better than loser kids. Well, I think nerdy is a relative term. Yes, cool kids tend to do better in life than loser kids, but loser and nerd are really two different categories. Every nerd that I have ever known that I would put into that category has been intelligent and hardworking, and generally ended up doing quite well as a result. Story 14. He was our QB in high school, liked by everyone, handsome, did good in school, and was a humble person, totally aware of his situation. Got married to a girl we went to school with, got a local job in a big local industry, had a kid with her. I saw him at the gas station last time I was in town. He seems like he's doing well. Story 15. One of the more popular girls, who I had a gigantic crush on, posed for Playboy right after high school, got pregnant, and got married. This was 20 years ago. I hear how she's divorced and works as a manager in a retail store. Nothing wrong with that, just that's where she is now. Story 16. Good old Brenda and Eddie. They had an apartment, deep pile carpets, and a couple of paintings from Sears. Nice big waterbed. They lasted a couple of years together, but it's always the same in the end. Divorce. I think they're still friends though. I see them every now and then down at the Village Green. Story 17. Most popular kid in my school moved to LA to try and make it in the movies. Was a bit of a jerk, and when I saw he was working as a bartender, I first kind of laughed about it. But then, over the years, I saw him get some small roles and keep going, and eventually had a small speaking part in some bigger productions. Now, I'm kind of rooting for him. Story 18. They never left. The ones that went away yearn to come back to my town, and are still best friends with the same popular people. That's okay, until you meet them and they try to act like they're better than you still, which they somewhat do in person still. It's either that, or they get super excited if you run into them outside of my hometown and talk to you. One of my friends still kind of knows them, and says that they only talk to people from my hometown. They only socialize with people from there, and no one else. All of their jobs are kind of meh, like nothing crazy in terms of career, and their lives revolve around living in the glory days. It's kind of sad, but I've also come to realize, as weird as it may seem to a lot of people, sometimes people just do what makes them happy, and I guess that's what makes them happy. Story 19. One drove drunk the wrong way on the highway at 2 a.m., doing about 40 miles per hour over the limit, and crashed, killing himself, his passenger, and an oncoming driver. Another thought he was a hard dealer and attempted to try and rob his coke connection. He got shot 6 times point blank in the stomach and bled out on a neighbor's porch. The last guy I remember had a promising football career ahead of him, but couldn't stop committing armed robbery. Story 20. One popular girl I went to high school with had a senior guy impregnate her in our junior year. She was a cheerleader and volleyball player. He played football. He tried to pay her to have an abortion. She kept the baby, and she became the salutatorian of our high school class. She had scholarships to go to college for being really smart and playing sports. She's a lawyer now, and her son is very happy and healthy. Story 21. Went to a pretty decent-sized high school, 400-plus graduating class, in Jersey, right outside of NYC. All of the popular girls in my grade ended up marrying the popular guys a year or two older than them. They all still hang out together on occasion from what I last saw on social media. It weirded me out because I know a few of them used to date each other in high school. So they all kind of just passed each other around and didn't leave the area. One time I was hanging out with a friend that wasn't popular in high school. We both moved away for college. We ran into one of the popular girls that I was cool with. We got to talking, and she was getting emotional, saying how cool it was that we moved away and got to see the world. My friend moved to Hoboken, 30 minutes away from where we grew up. It made him depressed by proxy.